I am presenting my paper Immobility Results in Poverty Gap among Upper and Lower Caste in India, an empirical analysis. The degree of variance in social circumstances between parents and offspring is referred to as intergenerational mobility or fluidity. In a society with high intergenerational mobility, a person's welfare is less influenced by their parents' social status. When a society's mobility is limited, a person's likelihood of prosperity in life is dictated by their birth accident, which is in violation of the society's fundamental rights. In India, physical work is regarded as an inferior kind of employment, and elite society fully excludes them from such labor intensive occupations, despite the fact that wealthy Hindus have become the affluent class and many lower caste people have been exiled to the bottom of the socio-economic pyramid. The situation has remained largely unaltered. In our paper, we have examined the role of intergenerational income mobility intergenerational income immobility due to intergenerational educational immobility on the poverty gap using FGT index as distributional statistic between forward caste and lower caste in children. And it has looked with seriously at how reservation policy has helped to reduce poverty among backward societies since independence. Human rights are one of the world's most pressing issues today. The first aspect of human rights is freedom, while the second is the socio-economic equality. In 1997, the United Nations Human Rights Commission highlighted the India government's failure to ensure basic human rights for Dalits in India. They explicitly states that despite the measures taken by the government, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe are victims of social deprivation and their rights are being violated. The responsibility given to the government of India by Article 46 of the Constitution of India is to take special care to look after the occasional and economic interest of the weaker sections of the society, especially the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Basically, in Indian society has a long history of being divided into different castes. This system dates back a few thousand years and has come a long way since then. Based on this idea, the lower castes in economic arena, particularly the Dalits and Adivashi, have been driven to the margin. When we look at the economic content of the caste system, it is clear that certain occupations under the caste system are specific to a certain caste. We see immobility in education, political power, and business since before independence, education was a peerist only right, political power was a warrior's only right, business was a merchant's only right. As a result, in India's economy, immobility in education, business, employment, and income has become the norm. So the inertia or immobility produces a vicious circle of poverty. In this study, we examine whether the second generation's monthly wages or income are above the poverty threshold. Apart from this, we also focus on the incidence of poverty, depth of poverty, and poverty severity across caste in India. Then we will try to figure out how much of differences there is between forward caste and backward caste in terms of poverty, incidence, depth, and severity, and what variables contribute to that disparity. So we have take motivation, we get motivation to do this research from the 2011 Socio-Economic Caste Census Survey, which gathered information on the socio-economic status of 179.7 million households, that revealing that 70.7 million households are not poor, 1.6 million families are suffering from severe poverty, and 87.2 million households are victims of deprivation. The socioeconomic caste census survey also reveals that 71.99 and 74.48% of SC/ST families or households suffering from deprivation. Our primary objective is to, in this research, is to determine the disparity in poverty incidence, depth, and severity among second-generation workers from backward caste and forward caste, as well as the exogenous factors that contribute to this disparity or to the poverty gap. The other important objective is to find out the composition effect of income immobility due to educational immobility on poverty gap between upper caste and backward caste. We have to use here the human development India Human Development Survey, which is conducted in 2012, which is a nationally representative multi-topic panel survey of 42,152 families in 384 districts, 1,420 villages, and 1,442 urban neighborhoods across India. We have to use here the different composition. Immobility composition includes educational immobility and income immobility, service composition, educational composition, age composition, household composition, employment composition, and residential composition. We have to use here the FIDPO 14 and Lumax model to analyze the empirical results, which was the extension of Osaka blinder reef regression model. The methodology is described below. Assume a joint, we have to take in a joint distribution function where M is dependent variable, X is our exogenous characters, and group G is the caste variable or group variable, and this joint distribution function is represented by equation 1. And we have to also taking a cumulative distribution function, which is represented by equation 2, to understand the gap of distribution statistic between two groups, forward caste and backward caste. So the cumulative distribution function of dependent variable M is expressed as equation 3, and incorporating equation 2 into equation 3, we get equation 4. The difference in the statistics statistic FGT due to the difference in the distribution of exogenous characters, and the difference in relation between dependent variable and the exogenous character. In the line of Osaka blinder reef regression, Osaka blinder, it is identified as a difference in average or composition effect, that is the characteristics, and the difference in coefficients. Next, now we have to clear the counterfactual scenario. Counterfactual scenario to understand the importance of difference in average characteristics, that is the composition effect, and the difference in coefficient, that is the coefficient effect on the change in distributional statistic. So the counterfactual statistic FGTC as follows. So equation 5. So we, if we substitute equation 5 into equation 3, we get equation 6. The first two part of the equation 6 is called the composition coefficient effect, and second two part of the equation 6 is called the composition effect. And now composition effect. So now the counterfactual statistic is derived using a reef regression, and equation 7, equation 8, equation 9 are all the counterfactual equation, which is derived by using the reef regression technique. But there is a problem to identify counterfactual term because we do not find directly the distribution of outcome and characters. So in this case, we can try to obtain an approximation for the counterfactual distribution by multiplying the observed distribution of characteristics with a factor psi x. So it is found this is the distribution this. So this is explained by 10. So reweighting factors, we have to use the bias rule. The equation 11 is represented the bias rule, how to determine the reweighting factor. So now once the reweighting factor is obtained, we can easily calculate the counterfactual term, so FGTC. Next, we get final decomposition components are now defined as by the equation 13. First part of this equation 13 is always structure or the coefficient effect, and second two parts relates to the aggregate composition effect. Now we have to model specification. We must simply propose a more flexible and accurate model to capture the composition effect on the poverty gap due to the statistical importance of specification error. If we find that the specification error is not significantly different from zero, but specification error is very small, then the overall change in the distributional statistics, this implied that regression gives us highly accurate estimates of the overall composition and coefficient effects in our model, in our empirical analysis. The important findings: poverty gap among other backward class and upper caste workers. We get the specification error is significant, indicating that composition impact in this model is more bearable. The total significant gap between OBC and UC workers are represented or 0.074 and 0.038 and 0.025 respectively. The aggregate composition effect. So now in India, we find that in India, 9.3% and 16.7% of second generation workers from the forward caste and OBC groups earn less than the poverty level. On the other hand, 4.4% and 8.2% of OBC and UC second generation workers suffering from depth of poverty, whereas 2.8% and 5.3% FC and OBC, forward caste or upper caste and OBC second generation workers are suffering from poverty severity. Now it is time to concentrate on the variables or factors that derive the poverty. First, we notice that the caste certificate has a positive composition effect, implying that caste certificate or reservation policies in education, employment, and other public service are widening the gap between forward caste and OBC. And immobility in income as a result of immobility in education contribute to a rise in the poverty gap between OBC and FC. On the other hand, the service composition aids in the reduction of poverty gaps without the risk of counterfactual effect from the coefficient effect, implying that public service and private service and Monrega all play key roles in poverty reduction. The composition effect of education also has an essential influence on the headcount ratio or incidence of poverty. Next, we look at the age composition, and age composition has also helps to reduce the poverty gap. Similarly, the pure composition effect of household characteristics aids in the reduction of the poverty gap, implying that an increase in the number of earning members in a household may influence the reduction of poverty gap in incidence, depth, and severity. In this case, we do not observe any impact of coefficient change of age group on the poverty gap. The pure composition effect of employment status helps to decrease the gap in poverty, depth, and severity, but coefficient change have a far bigger positive counterfactual effect. So the stronger positive pure coefficient effect of employment status will suppress the negative composition effect of employment status on the poverty gap. This means that the greater disparity in the full-time job status between FC and OBC is the primary cause of growing poverty gap. The residential composition includes more developed villages, other urban and metro urban. There is a negative pure composition effect of residential composition on the poverty gap, implying that a negative composition effect will narrow the gap between forward caste and other backward class. But a positive pure coefficient effect poses a greater counterfactual threat. The significantly stronger pure coefficient effect will attenuate the negative pure composition effect, implying that the poverty gap will eventually widen. So this is happening due to a large portion of population of backward caste lived in village area where the opportunity set of is very lower than the urban area. Next, we will go to the poverty gap among UC and SC/ST worker. The results is presented in below table 2A. we find 18% of a scheduled caste and scheduled tribe workers earn less than the poverty line monthly, with 8.6 and 6% and 5.6% of ST workers suffering from depth and severity of poverty. So the significant gap in incidence of poverty is 8.6%. For depth of poverty is 4.2%, and poverty severity is 2.8%. So in the caste certificate we get, the caste certificate has a strong coefficient change, negative coefficient change than the composition, negative composition effect. So sorry, positive composition effect. So the negative composition coefficient effect will pressure on the on to poverty gap, and ultimately caste certificate helps to reduce the poverty gap between scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and upper caste. And then the service composition. Similarly, the similarly the composition effect of intergenerational educational immobility and intergenerational income immobility is responsible to increase the poverty gap between SC, ST, and FC forward caste. The service composition also helps to reduce the poverty gap without any fear of counterfactual effect from coefficient change. So the education composition also helps to reduce the similarly incidence of poverty. An increase in the number of earning members, similarly when members of a family, also helps to lift the incomes of other members of the family above the poverty line. A household with although the composition impact has a negative effect on the poverty gap, we find a large positive counterfactual effect from the coefficient change, implying that employment structure will eventually cause the poverty gap to widen. This is because upper caste workers have regular or full-time jobs, while CST workers are generally working in the unorganized sector. Similarly, a strong coefficient change in residential status will pressure to increase the poverty gap. And so the so the a significant majority of the SC/ST population lives in rural India, where the opportunity set is insufficient to promote long-term growth. So the conclusion is that religion, caste, economy, and politics are all entwined in a society. Indian society is socially segregated due to historical prejudice in education, employment, and politics. As a result, a huge segment of population has remained behind in every economic status. So ultimately, the strong coefficient effect of caste certificate or reservation policy helps to reduce the poverty gap. And on the other hand, intergenerational income mobility due to intergenerational educational immobility increase the poverty gap. The large disparity in the residential status is responsible for factor to increase the gap. And the Monirega Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which aim to reduce the poverty in rural area. So it is very successful or helpful to decrease the poverty gap between upper caste and lower caste, and it increased the equality, socio-economic equality. Education also an important factor to increase the. If educational attainment increases, then poverty will reduce. And apart from this, the availability of resources in rural India should be enhanced in order for rural people to escape poverty.